Okay.
Let's see.
It says you are now on.
Okay, good. Okay, we're ready to go? Okay. Hi, I'm Larry Powell, and on this segment of News and Views, we'll be speaking to two officials of the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And maybe the simplest way to do this is to have each of you give your name and your position with the Conservancy.
Perfect. I'm Christine Chilton. I am the Communications Manager for the Manitoba region of the Nature Conservancy of Canada.
And I'm Josh Dillabaugh. I'm the Natural Area Coordinator for Southwest Manitoba. I'm based out of the Brandon office.
Okay, and may I call you Christine and Josh? Or?
Yes, definitely.
Yes, you can.
Okay, let's start with the most basic question of all. What is the Nature Conservancy?
Sure. The Nature Conservancy of Canada is the nation's leading non-profit biodiversity conservation organization. So what that means is that we conserve the natural spaces throughout Canada and the species that call them places home.
But the basic way you operate, I believe, is you get donations from the public and you actually purchase land to conserve it. Is that more or less the way it works?
Purchase is one of the tools in the toolbox that we use. So we do take donations. We are a nonprofit organization, but we do our land conservation through several options. So we have donations of land, we have purchases, and we also do conservation easements.
And when you do purchase it, is it as simple as just letting it go and reverting to wildlife habitat, or do you need to manage it in some way?
Well, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, as part of us purchasing a property or doing a conservation agreement, we have to raise additional funds in order to help the longevity of that property, and that goes into the management of that specific property. We try and mimic Mother Nature and her activities as best we can with the tools that we have available to us. So on our lands, we typically have a form of agriculture, so either grazing, haying. In some special cases, we still have some types of cultivation. And then also too, we do invasive species control, we do prescribed fire, and in some cases, a lot of cases, like a lot of other organizations, a big problem for us is woody species control on our grasslands. So.
I'm sorry, what kind of species control?
Woody species?
Woody species.
Yeah, so young aspen trees, snowberry, and various other types of woody shrubs. What happens is basically they recolonize former prairies and former grasslands and stuff like that. So,
now, some people might wonder about allowing cattle grazing, for example. Is this compatible with preserving wildlife habitat?
The simple answer is yes. Like for the properties that we're dealing with, especially on our mixed grass prairie, fescue prairie, tall grass prairie, and mixed grass prairie, I think I mentioned that one, sorry. They evolved being grazed. Manitoba itself was a disturbance-based system, so we had major fires roll through. We had, at one point in time, we had bears on the prairie, we had pronghorn, we had elk, we had mule deer, and we also had bison. So these systems evolved with grazing pressures on them.
Mm-hmm. Now, I understand that recently that you actually made a purchase in Manitoba. Could you tell me more about that? The Oak Lake region?
Oh yeah. We recently purchased 320 acres in the Greater Plum Lakes area. It's right smack dab in the middle of the Plum Lakes. It's surrounded by wetland ecosystems and a lot of birds that it's a major staging area for migrating waterfowl and also migrating shorebirds. Huge biodiversity values in the way. Like it's a major stopover point for birds from their way to the Arctic down to Texas and the Gulf Coast and everything like that, where they overwinter.
And would there be endangered species there that you would be helping to protect?
Yes. One of the major species that we're trying to help protect there are white pelicans. They're considered rare within Manitoba, and they jump out off the table. Also, too, there are some smaller species that migrate through as well. One that's been found on the property, which is not directly a waterfowl species, is found as bobolink, which is quite rare. It's a small grassland bird as well.
Now, you're no stranger to that area, I understand, or even in Manitoba, you have quite a history of being around. What would you call your proudest accomplishment in conservation?
I would say one of our proudest accomplishments might be the tallgrass prairie natural area. So tallgrass prairie, or grassland in general, are a habitat that is greatly endangered. It has been called one of the most endangered habitats of our time. So we partnered with quite a few different organizations down in the tallgrass prairie to conserve the area and a lot of the species that live there. So an example would be the Poweshiek skipperling that is found down in the tallgrass prairie.
What's that?
It is a small brown butterfly, I guess skipperling. It has been dwindling consistently throughout the years. We've been working with partners in the U.S. as well as partners across Manitoba to try to figure out what's happening with the butterfly and what we can do to help it. So we have been consistently finding less than 50 per year, and that would make the Poweshiek skipperling rarer than a panda. So those are things that we look at in terms of bringing.
And I've heard about the Assiniboine Delta, which was sort of new to me. Is that a new designation?
It is. The Assiniboine Delta is our newest natural area. So we work in 9 natural areas across the province. What we do is we look across Manitoba and we look at the areas that are most endangered and the species that most require assistance within their biodiversity goals. And Assiniboine Delta has been our most recent area of focus. And Josh here is our natural area coordinator for the Assiniboine Delta.
I know it includes, among other things, the Sandhills, or is that the same area as the Spruce Woods Park?
Yeah, there's actually a number of sandhill complexes throughout Manitoba. So the Assiniboine Delta area takes into account the Spruce Woods Sandhill area. Also to up more, there's sandy aeolian features in the Portage Sandhills, the St. Claude area, also to up around the Langford area as well. So there's several dotted across the landscape. That is the Assiniboine Delta area.
And is there an important aquifer underneath as well?
There is. There's the Assiniboine Delta aquifer that obviously the residents and local industry rely on heavily in order to obtain water and also to grow crops as well.
Now, on your website, I noticed a mention of the growing demand for resources such as timber, hydropower, and minerals chipping away at the boreal forest. Does that hold true in Manitoba as well as elsewhere?
From that particular standpoint, it's difficult for us to generalize it across the area. Manitoba hasn't seen the amount of development as other prairie provinces have for mineral development and for oil and gas. However, those resources are potentially there, and it's something we're interested in working within the boreal area.
I would imagine that hydro development would be, if anything, one of the significant factors with the new generating stations and the transmission lines.
Yeah, with the new transmission lines and the generating stations, it is something that is a development in Manitoba, and then there are the obviously effects surrounding the flooded backwaters and stuff like that, and the individual developments themselves. And it's something that Nature Conservancy is working with Hydro and other groups to.
And I think that's a big highlight as well, is that we have been working with some of these organizations to try to discuss some of the potential outcomes and what might happen at the end of the day. So I think the important part is that the the discussions are being had, and that's a good start.
Right. Now, everywhere you read about the world's wildlife, all forms of life except our own, seems to be in dire shape. For example, the World Wildlife Fund predicted last fall that of all the wildlife that we had around in 1970 will have diminished by more than 2/3 by 2020, which is only 3 years away. Now that's startling, isn't it? Like, is it that bad here? Or is it just over there in the Serengeti or somewhere?
Well, the World Wildlife Fund is referring to globally. So from the standpoint that Manitoba has, if you look at the Manitoba species at risk list and Canada in general, like relatively speaking, our numbers are probably a little bit lower than the average countries is. That being said, those particular numbers and those statements are why Nature Conservancy was formed. We're here to protect and provide places like landscape scale conservation where those species have a place to live. So the numbers are startling. It's something we've known for a while now, and it's one of those things why Nature Conservancy was created.
Mm-hmm. But as far as the larger animals are concerned, like how about caribou and moose, which we both have in Manitoba? How are they doing?
There was actually a greater moose conference in Brandon back in the summertime, and just kind of highlight to that would be that they found that boreal populations of moose are on a slight decline, whereas populations across the prairies and more agricultural zones have been on a slight rise. They're not 100% sure why. As far as caribou numbers go, our work directly doesn't take us within the areas that the caribou are, so we'd have to reach out and talk to someone from the province. We don't have those direct numbers on us.
I've been reading something about the Boreal Forest Agreement. I understand that the Conservancy is a party to that. Can either one of you speak to that as to what that involves? It's a huge, vast area that it covers, and it involves several parties, including Greenpeace and even the forest companies.
No, I'm not.
You're
sure.
not. Maybe I was mistaken about the Conservancy actually being party to that.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure of that
Okay.
one myself. I wouldn't be. I know we've attended meetings. The Manitoba region has attended meetings up in the PAW in regards to maybe the greater effort. However, there is also an entity called the Nature Conservancy, which sometimes we get confused with because we're Nature Conservancy of Canada, and people just call us the Conservancy sometimes. So there can be a little bit of overlap there, but I don't have direct knowledge of.
Okay. But there is a Nature Conservancy in the States. Are you not a branch of that? Or?
No, we are
not.
completely separate. So we are the Nature Conservancy of Canada.
Okay.
We are two completely separate entities,
Right.
and
It's not hard to get confused with so many
yes, we have heard that before.
conservation and environmental organizations. To what extent is climate change having an impact on our wildlife and habitat?
A lot of it right now is seen as predictive models, so it depends on which predictive model you look at. So what we're seeing from the predictive models is we're having more extreme weather events. So we're getting the same amount of rain as we did at one point in time, if not a little bit more, but we're getting them in much more condensed storms. So it creates much more volatility within our direct populations. We're actually taking on an initiative to do climate change adaptations to our natural area conservation plans to help us plan in the future for that ever-changing climate. I don't have any direct numbers or direct effects of the species within Manitoba, but I think everybody can tell that some areas are a little bit wetter than they were before, some areas are a little bit drier, and as a result, some species will be displaced from that, and unfortunately, that's an inevitability that we're going to have to deal with.
Right. I know that one thing that sort of leaps to mind in regard to that is the wildfires, and of course the terrible ones they had in Alberta around Fort McMurray. Now I have heard that the forests themselves are regenerating quite nicely, but we never hear much about, like, animals must die in those kinds of fires, and to what extent? Do we know?
While there is some take of, I would say, animals, maybe not large wildlife, in large fires like that, you hear a lot of stories whenever there's large burns, especially from down in the States and even from in Canada, where the animals know where to go in these particular situations. We've taken training for our prescribed fire program, and every year we do a refresher course, and there is comments made within these refresher courses that, cow and a calf moose headed towards the fire, and then later they were seeding it in a burned out area that was protected, and so they survived that particular fire. Now, that being said, there's not just large animals, there's invertebrates, insects, other small mammals and stuff like that may not survive them. I don't think we've developed a great enough way to determine the incidental take from that, from a Nature's Conservancy standpoint, mainly because we view fire as more a natural occurrence, and the incidental take of species from a natural occurrence is something that's evolutionally happened since the planet's been around.
Yeah, I believe they have controlled burns, and even in Riding Mountain Park.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have partnered with Riding Mountain. We also do them out in the Tallgrass Prairie. And prescribed fire is something that we actually use as a land management tool, as a stewardship tool. So it is something that sort of helps to control woody encroachment. It's also something that some species particularly like, and we'll find will often be attracted to a area that had previously had fire on them.
To what extent, I've already asked about climate change, sorry. But what about, this is a related one then, is Canada, I don't know if this is a loaded question or not, but is Canada living up to its commitments it made at the Paris Climate Accord?
I don't know that we would be in a position to answer that question directly. I think that what we can say is that Canada is in a position that a lot of other countries are not. We still have a lot of natural spaces. We still have a lot of healthy water bodies and different types of habitat. So we are in a position to conserve and to move forward much better than other parts of the world who have already progressed past where we currently are.
Okay, I may be skipping back a little to what we talked about earlier, but it just occurred to me, are there things that government has done that they could be doing better? I'm thinking something I heard a while back, that the government has been pretty liberal or in issuing hunting permits for moose, for example, which are now having problems. Are there any things like that you feel could be improved?
Well, I think as conservation in general, the more we learn, the better we get at it. So I feel there's always room for improvement. To speak specifically for the province and how they calculate their big game populations and the take that they can have for that, those particular species, I don't think Nature Conservancy Canada is in any type of position to make any criticism or like comment on it, other than we do know some of the professionals from that area. They're trying to do their best, and it's something that, as conservation in general, we're all always learning more, and we're always applying that as we go forward.
And I guess to be fair to government, there was some government funding at the Oak Lake acquisition, am I correct?
Yep. We had federal funds and some provincial funds in the acquisition of the Oak Lake property.
Great. I talked to someone who I know who used to work for Nature Conservancy, And it was her opinion that there were two main ecosystems that were particularly important in preserving. One was the grasslands, which I've already mentioned, because they can act as carbon sequesters. And two were the corridors that actually she worked on it herself, developing corridors where the larger animals can move more freely from one wilderness to another, like she worked on the corridor between Duck Mountain and the Riding Mountain. Would you agree with that?
For animal movement, corridors are very important. Whenever we draw out the boundaries of our natural areas, we try and now connect them just so that species themselves have the ability to move through those corridors. And a lot of the people refer to corridors for large mammals, but corridors also are important for small birds. The forest-based birds, they require areas to migrate through as well. So it's not just for large animals. So they have their importance landscape scale-wise, and from that standpoint, they would be important to NCC, but for our work directly isn't to make new corridors or anything like that within those areas.
Okay, well, probably my final question. If anyone watching this likes what they see, how do they, what would they do to donate to the Conservancy?
We would encourage people to come to the website, which is www.natureconservancy.ca/MB, and all of our contact information will be on there. And you can also contact us at our main office, area code 204-942-6156.
Okay, well, thank you both for coming by today. On this edition of News and Views, I've been talking to Christine Chilton and Joshua Dillabaugh of the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and they were in Neepawa recently to speak to the Rotary Club. I'm Larry Powell. Thanks for watching.